Hello, Shalom family. Love to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Welcome. On this channel, I discuss topics to edify and encourage the children of Yisrael to return to the ancient path of Yahuwah. I invite you to comment, like, subscribe, and share this video. We're going to continue on the subject of Niddah separation according to the commandments of Yahuwah given to the Israelites. To review, Niddah describes a woman who has experienced bloody vaginal discharge, most commonly during menstruation, which is usually completed after 7 days with an immersion in a mikvah or ritual bath. The Torah prohibits sexual intercourse with a Niddah. Literally, the feminine noun Niddah means moved, that is, separated, and generally refers to separation due to ritual impurity. In this lesson, we're going to go further in depth in how the ancient Hebrews fulfilled this commandment of separation.
Stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gotta keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones.
Separation due to menstruation had both public and private aspects. Because of the prohibition of entering the temple in a state of ritual impurity, this manifestation of female physiology clearly limited aspects of worship for women of childbearing years. A woman in Niddah would not participate in set-apart times or feast days, would not participate in set-apart gatherings, or enter the temple. In the private sphere, food or objects which required a ritual state of purity could not be touched by menstruating women without becoming contaminated or made unfit for consumption. So we understand that the ancient Hebrews that observed the Torah did not eat unclean food. And even if the food was from a clean source, if a Niddah touched the food, that would make the food unclean. From the history of Flavius Josephus against Appian, Book 2. Into the first court everybody was allowed to go, even foreigners, and none but women, during their courses, were prohibited to pass through it. All the Yahudim, or Jews, went into the second court as well as their wives. When they were free from all uncleanness, into the third court went in the Yehudi men, or Jewish men, when they were clean and purified. According to the historian Josephus, women that were unclean would not be allowed to enter into the temple. We understand that the temple courts were separated into sections. There was the court of the Gentiles, or the court of the foreigners. Then there was the court of the women, where the Yehudi women would worship. And then there was the court of the Israelites, where the Israelite men would worship. So a person who was ritually unclean, man or woman, would not be allowed to worship in the temple area. Ezekiel chapter 4. And then said I, Adonai Yahuwah, behold, my soul has not been polluted, for from my youth even up till now have I not eaten of that which dies of itself, or is torn in pieces, neither came there abominable flesh into my mouth. So this is the prophet speaking to Yahuwah when Yahuwah asked him to eat something cooked with human feces. And the prophet protested because he said that he had never eaten something that was abominable or unclean. And that word abominable comes from the Hebrew pigul, which means foul thing, refuse. Unclean, abominable. Acts chapter 10. But Kepha, or Peter, said, Not so, Adoni, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. So again, Kepha, the disciple of Yahusha, also confessed that he had never eaten anything that was unclean. So we can assume that both Kepha and the prophet Hezekiah both have mothers who went through their courses of menstruation. They probably lived with their grandmothers. They probably lived with their aunts, their cousins, their sisters, and probably even had daughters. But they confessed that even though in their household there may have been women that experienced menstruation, they themselves had never eaten anything that was unclean. So in other words, when the women in their households were in their Niddah state, they did not eat food prepared by those women in Niddah state. Mark chapter 5. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was not bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Yahusha, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And that's a reference to Malachi chapter 4. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. So when Yahusha was ministering, there was a woman who had an issue of blood, a flow of blood. She was in her Niddah state for 12 years. And she had sought doctors to heal her of this condition, but no one was able to heal her. So she came in, pressed through the crowd to touch his garment. And according to Malachi chapter 4, there's healing in his wings, or healing in the hem of his garment. Verse 30. And Yahusha, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, You see the multitude thronging you, and say you, Who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him, and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace, and be whole of your plague. So imagine this woman who was menstruous for 12 years. For 12 years, if she was married, she was separated from her husband for 12 years. For 12 years, she would not have been able to enter the temple. She would not have been able to come to Sabbath gatherings. She would not have been able to rehearse subpart times or feast days. She would have been separated from her family for 12 years. We see that she pressed into the crowd, and she was afraid after she was healed. Why was she afraid to acknowledge what had happened? Because she was in Niddah. She was separated. She was not supposed to be there. Why was it important for Yahusha to have the woman confess what had happened? Because when she was in her Niddah state, she was in her unclean state. She had pressed through the crowd, meaning every person that she touched in that crowd became ritually unclean. So she had to confess what she did so that the people knew that they had been made unclean by a woman in her Niddah state. So if a person had been planning to go to the temple to worship, they needed to know that they had to put that plan off because they were made unclean by a woman in Niddah touching them. But we see by the response of Yahusha that he had mercy on her. He said, daughter. In other words, he was spreading his authority over, his protection over her, and saying, don't worry, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace. So we see here why it was such an important issue for this woman to be healed. Because according to the Torah, she was separated from Hebraic society for 12 years. Yeshayahu, or Isaiah chapter 54. For your Maker is your husband, Yahuwah Zabod is his name, and your Redeemer, the set-apart one of Yisrael. The Elohim of the whole earth shall he be called. So we understand that Yahuwah Zabod is the husband of the nation of Yisrael. At Mount Sinai, they made a covenant, and that covenant is a marriage covenant. Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah, chapter 3. Surely as a wife treacherously departed from her husband, so have you dealt treacherously with me, O house of Yisrael, says Yahuwah. In chapter 31, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them, says Yahuwah. So again, we see the relationship between Yahuwah and the nation of Israel is a marriage relationship. Yeshayahu, or Isaiah, chapter 64. But we are all as an unclean thing, and all our righteousness are as filthy rags. And we all do fade as a leaf, and our iniquities, like the wind, have taken us away. So that word there, filthy rags, in the Hebrew is ad, which means menstruation, filthy rag, stained garment. So that term there, our righteousness, all our righteousness are as filthy rags, is a reference to the rag that the women would use to blot up their menstrual blood. So again, remember that the nation of Israel is considered the wife of Yahuwah. And here we see that our righteousness, our self-righteousness, when we do not follow the Torah, when we follow our own doctrines, when we follow the doctrines of man, that is like filthy rags. That's like the menstrual rag, that blood cloth that a woman uses to clean up her menstrual blood. It's something that is filthy to Yahuwah. It's something that is an abomination to Yahuwah when we try to create our own doctrines, man-made religions. Ezekiel chapter 36. Moreover, the word of Yahuwah came unto me, saying, Son of man, when the house of Yisrael dwelt in their own land, they defiled it by their own way and by their doings. Their way was before me as the uncleanness of a removed woman. And that phrase, removed woman, in the Hebrew is Niddah. So again, when we follow our own way, it's the same uncleanness to Yahuwah as a woman in her menstruation. Zechariah chapter 13. In that day there shall be a fountain opened to the house of Dawood, or David, and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for uncleanness. Alright? And again, that word uncleanness comes from the Hebrew Niddah. Bamidbar, or Numbers chapter 5. And Yahuwah spoke unto Moshe, saying, Command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, and everyone that has an issue, and whosoever is defiled by the dead. Both male and female shall you put out. Without the camp shall you put them, that they defile not their camps in the midst whereof I dwell. And the children of Israel did so, and put them out without the camp. As Yahuwah spoke unto Moshe, so did the children of Israel. So we see here that Yahuwah commanded the Israelites to remove the unclean people from the camp. So this included the women that were in Niddah, or the women in their menstrual separation, that they defile not their camps. And that word defile comes from the Hebrew tamah, or unclean, that we looked at in the first lesson. So the Israelites had an understanding that if you kept the woman who is in her menstruation inside the community, inside the camp, inside the village, her uncleanness would defile the community. So they literally separated the menstruous woman from the community. Devarim, or Deuteronomy chapter 23. When the host goes forth against your enemies to keep you from every wicked thing. Verse 14. For Yahuwah your Elohim walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you, and to give up your enemies before you. Therefore shall your camp be set apart, that he see no unclean thing in you, and turn away from you. So again, we see that the camp, the community, is supposed to be clean. And Yahuwah dwelt among the Israelites. So, in other words, a woman in Niddah would not live among the community. They would literally be separated from the community during her time of Niddah. Olaudah Equiano, known for most of his life as Gustavus Vasa, was a writer and abolitionist from, according to his memoir, the Aboe region of the Kingdom of Benin, today southern Nigeria. Enslaved as a child in Africa, he was taken to the Caribbean and sold as a slave to a Royal Navy officer. He was sold twice more, but purchased his freedom in 1766. He published his autobiography, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, in 1789. So Olaudah was from the Igbo tribe. So we're going to look at how the Igbo Bantu Israelites practice the laws of Niddah in their community.
I have before remarked that the natives of this part of Africa are extremely cleanly. This necessary habit of decency was with us a part of religion, and therefore we had many purifications and washings, indeed almost as many, and used on the same occasions, if my recollection does not fail me, as the Jews. Those that touched the dead at any time were obliged to wash and purify themselves before they could enter a dwelling house. Every woman, too, at certain times, was forbidden to come into a dwelling house or touch any person or anything we ate. I was so fond of my mother, I could not keep from her, or avoid touching her at some of those periods, in consequence of which I was obliged to be kept out with her in a little house made for that purpose, till offering was made, and then we were purified.
A menstruation hut is a place of seclusion or isolation used by certain cultures with strong menstrual taboos. The same or a similar structure may be used for childbirth and postpartum confinement. Based on beliefs around ritual impurity, these huts are usually built near the family home. And in this picture you see a Niddah hut, or Margam Gojo, at the Jewish village of Ambober in northern Ethiopia in 1976. A prominent Ethiopian Jewish tradition is strict observance of purity laws. For instance, when a woman is menstruating in Ethiopian Jewish society, she is sent to live in a specified tent outside of the village until she becomes pure once again, as is prescribed to be done in the temple scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls. When a woman becomes Niddah, cast out during menstruation, she may remain in a Niddah hut for some of the time. These huts exist in the Ethiopian highlands. The woman must stay in the hut, usually located on the margins of the village, for 7 days. While in these huts, the woman cannot cook, apart from coffee and the roasting of grain. Others may bring food to them, but while doing so, they take care in avoiding physical contact. Menstruation huts in Ethiopia hold a special place, as Jewish women try to continue this custom. In Ethiopia, they refer to these menstruation huts as margam gojos. Within the margam gojos, there are a few utensils, some pieces of equipment, and some basic furniture. The stones are placed in a circular shape around the menstruation hut at a radius of 1.5 meters. These stones help distinguish between perceived impure and pure spaces. The menstruation blood is thought to be impure, as Jewish Ethiopians believe the failure to give birth is manifested in the blood. If anyone were to come in contact with the woman during their menstruation, they would too have to stay in the hut. Therefore, to avoid contact, the family of the woman in the margam gojos will leave food outside the door. If her blood is to touch food or drink, it will be thrown out. This is why women wear leather belts under their skirts with fabric tied to them to prevent any dripping. The same idea is conveyed in that a Jewish woman cannot go to or cross rivers during menstruation lest she drip and contaminate the river. Once a woman has finished menstruating, another woman will watch her emerge in the water. There, the woman who has just finished menstruating will wash herself and the clothes she wore in the margam gojo. After she and her clothes are clean, she will then change into pure clothes that have been retrieved from her home. The only time that a Jewish woman ceases going to the margam gojo is when she starts menopause. As we return to the ancient pathways and reject the customs of our oppressors, we need to really go back and understand the commandments of Yahuwah in regards to Niddah separation. We look at the cultures from East to West Africa, and they still maintain the same practice of Niddah separation. When you look at the Beta Israel or Jewish Ethiopians in East Africa, where they separated their women in huts outside the village, to West Africa, to the Igbos, and how they separated their women in Niddah from the villages, is the same practice. As we investigate how our ancestors who were righteous practiced the laws, statutes, and commandments of Yahuwah, we need to understand that this is a commandment. Even though this is not something that is regarded highly in Western culture is not our culture. We need to return to our own culture, to the culture that Yahuwah gave us in His Torah. And as we see that the nation of Israel is in a marriage covenant with Yahuwah, and how Yahuwah regarded the nation of Israel as being in Niddah or unclean when we follow our own religions, our own man-made traditions. We need to put away these filthy, menstruous rags from us and return to the Torah of Yahuwah. Fear Elohim and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Bind up the testimony, seal the Torah among my disciples. Shalom, family.